Good morning. My name is Pastor Jim Hardy of the Calvary Christian Church in Valleley. And you thought I was going to dance. No, especially on behalf of Rachel's family and closest friends, I just want to extend a welcome to everybody who's here today. As I look around at the sea of faces here, that's quite a testimony to Rachel's impact on so many people. And I know the family especially is very glad that you're here to celebrate her life today. We'd just like to begin, if we could, by praying together. And if you could just bow your heads, I'll lead us during this prayer time. Father, we're so grateful to you for the life that we have and the life that we can live on this earth. We each have a certain amount of time that we're going to be here. It's like we have an expiration date stamped on us, but we always like to think we're going to be here 2 or 3 times as long as we really are. But during that time, we have a chance to love people and to be loved by people. And we know that Rachel was very good at that. Father, I thank you for the impact that she's been able to have on so many. And on a day like this, we come here with mixed emotion. On one hand, we wouldn't wish her back in the same shape that she was in. But on the other hand, she is going to be greatly missed. So I pray that during this service today, with the music we listen to and the scripture we read, the comments that are made, all of those good things combined, I pray that they can be some good salve or some good medicine to help us be able to cope with the grief that we feel. Please use all these things, all these people. Father, please help us to be able to help each other. as we go through this hard time. And we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. So I'd like to read a passage of Scripture if I could, and it's one that is probably the most familiar passage in the Scriptures. In the Old Testament, there's a collection of 150 Psalms that are all pulled together, the book of Psalms. And we read these like they're poetry, and if you were Hebrew, you'd say, yes, that's poetry. But the Hebrew people would put music to these, and they would sing these as they went to worship. And so, as I read the 23rd Psalm today, just imagine, if you would, that King David, as he wrote this, wasn't just writing poetry, he was writing song lyrics. And it's a song about life. Everybody has a life story. It's kind of like noses. Everybody's got one. Whether you're 9 or 109 or 49, you've got a life story. And as David is writing his life story, he puts it in terms of, from the perspective of a talking sheep. Now, I don't know if anybody here is old enough to remember Mr. Ed the Talking Horse. Okay. And if you can put that kind of voice into the 23rd Psalm, I think you'll get a little bit of a picture of what David was going for. In David's life story, he starts talking about who he follows in his life. And the picture is a setting of a little talking sheep down on the farm, and everything is provided for him, and he's poking his head through the fence, talking to the neighbor's sheep, bragging about what a great shepherd he's got. He uses the word he. He starts in second person, talking about somebody else, his great shepherd. And notice what he says. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And this little sheep could go on and on, bragging about what a great shepherd he's got. And life is so good when you're down on the farm, just like life is so good for us most of the time. And we'd like to have it so that life goes in a straight line, or it just keeps climbing uphill steadily. But that's not the way life is. If you've lived any amount of time at all, you know life is more like a roller coaster, or it's more like the stock market. It's up, then it crashes, it's up. And the sheep is saying at this time in his life, life is so good. I'm down on the farm, everything's predictable, everything is happening great. But then the scene changes. Notice in the next part of the psalm, the sheep are on the move. You see, they can't stay on the hot, dry plains all summer long because the water dries up, the grass gets crinkly and brown, and the shepherd, good shepherd that he is, he's got to move the sheep to the high country. But when you do that, you also invite trouble. There could be rock slides, there could be wild animal attacks, there could be all kinds of things happen as you move the sheep and they're in the high country. But notice in the hard times now, the sheep stops talking in second person and he moves to first person. He doesn't say he. Now he's eyeball to eyeball with the shepherd, and he uses the word you. He says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runneth over. This sheep is a smart sheep. He knows if he starts with this good shepherd that takes good care of him when times are good, he's the shepherd to stick with even when times are hard. He says, I have no fear because you provide comfort. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. As we get to the last part of the psalm, they're on their way back to the farm again. End of the season has happened. They're leaving the high country, and as they make their way back to the farm, this sheep is just reflecting on life. He's not talking about the shepherd or to the shepherd. He's just reminiscing in his head. And he says, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Now, he's a confident sheep. He's not saying, maybe I'll dwell in the house of the Lord, or if I get lucky, or if the stars align. He's made a decision, and he knows if he follows the shepherd in good times, follows the shepherd in hard times, the shepherd's going to lead him home in the end. He's not confident in himself, because sheep are just sheep. Sheep make dumb decisions sometimes. Sheep do weird things. But his confidence is in his good shepherd. And if he follows the shepherd, he'll lead him home in the end. There's a story I've told before, but I love this story. And it's about a guy that moves into a small town, and he's very good at flowers. And by the way, these are beautiful. This guy does this kind of thing, and he opens his own flower shop. And he chose a great spot in town, because just down the street there's a funeral home, and just next door to him there's an empty building where another business could relocate. And a few months in, business is booming. Well, a familiar face came through the door, and he said, "Hey, I recognize you." And the customer says, "Well, you should. I was in last week and ordered flowers, but I got a bone to pick with you. You see, I ordered flowers from my friend that relocated his business next door here. Well, you sent him flowers, all right, but you put a ribbon on there that said, 'Rest in peace.'" And the florist shop owner was devastated. He said, "I am so sorry." He said, "I don't know what to do except apologize, and of course I'll refund your money." But then he got a little smile on his face, and he said, "You know, if that ribbon went over there, I'm guessing the one that went to the funeral home said something like, 'Good luck in your new location.'" And isn't that kind of what we're saying to Rachel today? I mean, we're all sheep today, right? We recognize that. We're not here as judges of any kind to say who goes where, who doesn't go where. We're fellow travelers in this life. We make choices about what shepherd we follow. We make choices, and we trust the shepherd to lead us home in the end. And so as we go through our service today, I hope as we think about Rachel's life, we can laugh a little, we can reminisce, we can go back and let our memories jog us and just celebrate a life well lived. Now I'm going to step aside now and just invite Brandy, if she would, to step forward, and she'll be reading just a beautiful eulogy.
Oh, guys, I'm going to try. This room is full. Thank you all for being here to help us celebrate our friend, our loved one. She really wanted this to be a celebration of the life she lived and those she loved and that loved her back. Oh, lady, I'm going to try. For those that don't know me, my name is Brandy Clark. And Rachel was my supervisor and my mentor. And later my colleague and my friend that became my family. And my daughter and I were just remembering the other day the Thanksgiving that Rachel spent with us. And for those of you who also don't know, we usually host Thanksgiving. And my husband's the youngest of 10. Yeah, Thanksgiving is big at our house. We usually have at least 45 people. And I remember Rachel came over early and spent the day just hanging out. We watched the parade, we made food, it was nice and leisurely for a while, and then people started showing up. And a few more people started showing up, and then it got really full and it got really loud, and I caught Rachel in the kitchen, eyes really big. She said, where are all these people gonna go? And I said, oh, they'll find a place. That's what we do. And a few moments later, I stood by her in the kitchen, and she turned and she goes, I feel like I'm in a land of giants. I said, well, you kind of are. And that's because Rachel was short. I'm going to read a little bit of a story written by those who knew her well. And I think there's a lot of us in here that shared different moments of time with her. So hopefully this reflects a little bit about what you knew of the life and the woman that you love too. Dr. Rachel Valleley was an incredible spirit, connected to people through love, compassion, and a desire to live life to the fullest. Rachel was born on September 17, 1972 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, to Steve and Elreen Lee. She joined her brother Tim, and from the earliest ages, they were inseparable, full of laughter with equal portions torment. Rachel was a free spirit who had a love for climbing trees, sports, and sometimes a little mischief. When Rachel was in grade school, she moved to Omaha, Nebraska. She grew up in the Ponca Hills neighborhood of Omaha. Rachel was a bit of a sports extraordinaire, figure skating, running, triathlons, and synchronized swimming. She was fearless and willing to try anything, but her favorite was softball. Her dad, Steve, coached her team. When she was older, they played together on the same team, a fierce father-daughter duo. Rachel attended Marion High School, graduating in 1990. While at Marion, she expanded her skills and followed her father's diverse interests. She found her love of speech. In stories, she would often recall how devious she and her friends were. No one suspected shenanigans from this group, she would say. We looked too innocent. We were speech nerds. Rachel always charted her own path, free spirit and full of energy. She loved to laugh, would spontaneously dance, and would sing random song lyrics to bring levity to a tough day. The dance moves did not end when she graduated from high school. They continued on throughout her adult life when she enrolled at the University of Minnesota to study developmental psychology. Her Minnesota blood runs deep. She would bleed purple, as Minnesota Viking fans would say. You could always find Rachel perched in front of the TV during football season, adorned in her best purple, screaming at the television to cheer on her team. After graduating from the University of Minnesota, she continued her education at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, earning her PhD in school psychology. She graduated in 2001 and became a professor with the Monroe Meyer Institute. Although her life had not been simple or easy, she channeled those experiences to deeply and passionately help others through her work at MMI. Her work and research always focused on how best to provide support to those who needed it. And for this, she had earned a national reputation as a leader in her field. In July of 2021, she was the first female to be promoted to full professor in the psychology department at MMI. During her life, Rachel loved with an open heart, especially her two children, Jessica and Jacob. She wanted her children to love big and be kind, and like she did in her life, find their passion and go for it. Rachel was their greatest cheerleader, supporting them through the tough times, yelling chants from the sidelines, and most of all, loving them with an infinite love. Jake and Jess, your mom is so loved. And so are you. She was like family to many of us, and that makes you family too. We're going to be like those aunts and uncles you didn't know you had. Some of us are cooler than others. But we're here for you. Whatever you need, we're here for you. Rachel prepared a few statements for today. I'm going to take some time to read those. So, in her words, This will not be a conventional funeral, but more of a reflection on who I was and those important to me. For those that really knew me or didn't, I enjoyed life and had a positive outlook. If I got mad, I usually got over it quickly. I loved softball. I grew up on the field and always wished I could be there. I was also known to spontaneously dance and blurt out random song lyrics. Unfortunately, I never found that salsa partner. I loved water and had hopes of living on a lake with a pontoon boat someday. And who could forget the Vikings? Skol Vikings. I hope I said that right. I was a fighter, but unfortunately lost this fight. However, I want each of you to fight each day, never give up, and never surrender. If Rachel were here, I know she had a nice long list of people she wanted to show her gratitude, show her love, and thank for the love they had given in her life. So bear with me, I'm going to try my best. I have a few people that I want to acknowledge. To Rachel's neighbor family. She spoke of you very fondly and all of the community that you created. It was often hard to get her to do anything else on a Saturday because she loved spending time in the driveway with you all. I want to thank you all for the love and support you showed her and her family. Dustin, thank you for checking in on her and caring for her and for reaching out to the rest of us to let her know how she was doing and what she needed. And thank you for taking care of her fur babies. I know how much she appreciated that. Joe. Rachel adored you. You were like a godfather to her. I thank you for giving her a place to lead and to do what she did best, which was helping others. I thank you for checking in on her, for taking her to doctor visits, for bringing her dinner and letting her know that she was loved. Mark, you are like a big brother to Rachel in the department. I always enjoyed listening to the two of you geek out when you would talk about The Walking Dead, a show I was never going to watch. But I thank you for all that you taught her that brought her to MMI. There are many in our MMI family that I have to thank that would take me the rest of the day. Jenny, Allison, and Mindy. Thank you for helping to show Rachel how much she was loved and appreciated by all of the rest of us, organizing care baskets, visiting with her, checking in on her to see what she needed, and checking in on the rest of us. Holly, thank you for spending time doing the things that Rachel loved most, even taking her to scary movies, which I again was never going to do. And Katie, thank you for going with them. Also, thank you for walking through all this with me. I appreciate you. Oh, Keith. Rachel thought the world of you, and she revered you so much as a leader. I know these past few months were really difficult. You gave us all the space to remember that we were family first, and for that I thank you. I thank you for the care you showed Rachel and the support you gave to all of us. And the Rebeccas, I really wish we got to meet at a backyard barbecue instead of like this. But it's very clear why Rachel chose you as friends. And I thank you for the love and support you showed her and the times that you had together. And the support that you showed me while we walked through this. At last, Rachel, I am just so grateful to have known you. I thank you for all you taught me and the love and the friendship that you showed me and for bringing me back home. I love you immensely. Okay, I'm done. And I made it. And at this time, I know there's many others who shared lots of love with Rachel too, who have things that they want to say. And so first we're going to let her friend Sean speak before we turn it over to Joe and Keith, and then open the floor to whoever else has some words that they want to say today.
Good morning. My name is Sean McCormick, and I grew up with Rachel. So these are my thoughts about our friendship. I first met Rachel when she moved into the pink house that was catty corner to my backyard. I had the hardest time remembering her name because my cousin Michelle had spent 2 weeks with us, and I had never heard the name Rachel. And so I always called Rachel Michelle. Our lifelong friendship began with me calling her the wrong name and her thinking I was a boy because I have a boy's name and I had short hair. And yeah, not much has changed. Rachel, her family moved to the neighborhood the summer before we started 3rd grade. I was 8 and she was 7. I was very curious about this new person because she was always in the tree in her backyard. I quickly learned that she was a self-proclaimed tomboy. At that time, I hadn't ever heard that phrase, but it was 100% her. She medaled in junior marathons, completed junior triathlons, played softball, took synchronized swimming lessons, ice skated, roller skated, took equestrian riding lessons, and she was always climbing the trees. She was brave, confident, intelligent, curious, and full of life. She had already had so many adventures in her young life, and no one was going to stand in her way. I'm not sure her and I could have been more opposite, but I quickly realized that I wanted to be just like her. Once I was finally able to remember her name, and she believed me that I was in fact a girl, our friendship began. We spent hours talking, giggling, playing, running through her house, driving her brother Tim as crazy as he drove her. We were outside and just being little kids. I still remember the very first night that her parents said we could have a sleepover. I know we continued our escapades all through the night because to this day I still remember her parents saying, "You two better knock it off and go to bed or Sean has to go home." Rachel was so full of knowledge and experiences that I remember always wanting to know more. Growing up, she provided me with opportunities that I would have never known about, such as the Rocky Horror Picture Show in full costume, and then on the other hand, the operetta Les Miserables. She exposed me to music like the song Xanadu and artists like Annie Lennox, Tracy Chapman, Bette Midler, and bands like Queen and Echo Farm. She had a fashion sense and style that I swore came straight from New York and not Minnesota. She kept her dressers in the closets and her bed sat on the floor instead of on a bed frame. She was not afraid to be her own person and live life the way she wanted it to look. One gem of knowledge that Rachel taught me early on in our friendship was the fact that if you were a thumbsucker, you could change the flavor of your thumb instead of always tasting boring flavor. When we first met, she had a habit of sucking her thumb. Since I was so in awe of her, I tried to develop the habit as well. At one point, when I decided it just wasn't for me, she advised me that you can change the flavor of your thumb by quickly picking another finger, suck on it real quick, and then put your thumb back in. Well, since she said it, and she was never wrong, I thought it worked. Besides thumb-sucking and being a bit of a rebel by ignoring the rules, Rachel was an amazingly positive influence on me as well. Whether she ever realized it or not, she made me a better person. She challenged me in ways that helped me grow. For instance, in the summer, her mom would always take her swimming at Merritt Beach, and it always sounded so fun, and I always wanted to go. And so I remember I asked, well, why can't I go with you? And she said, you don't know how to swim. And I was like devastated, but even though it hurt, it made me learn how to swim. Another example of how she challenged me was that when she would play softball with her dad. I always wanted to play softball with her dad too. And again, she was blunt and she said, you're not that good. So, while it was tough to hear, it was motivation to be a better softball player so that one day I could play with Mr. Lee's team as well. Even though we attended different high schools, our friendship was important and solid enough that we continued to spend countless hours together. We would talk about school, fashion, boys, and life. Rachel introduced me to her friends and always tried to help me come out of my shell. She told me things I needed to hear, even if it made me mad, hurt, or uncomfortable, or it opened my eyes to reality. Another example of the positive influence she was on my life was when we were driving back from a fall hayrack ride in Bonfire, and we started talking about what I was doing with my life. At that time, I had no direction. I was just existing. I had dropped out of college before finishing my bachelor's degree in elementary education. I told Rachel about how when I went to my daughter's second grade conferences earlier that day, I sat in the hall waiting and thought, I want to be a teacher. Rachel just looked at me and said, so go back and finish college. But I had all these reasons in my head why they wouldn't work, and Rachel countered every single one. A few months later, I was enrolled at UNO and went on to finish my degree. Rachel was my motivation to continue on with my education as well, because considering she lost her hero, her dad, right before she started college, then she could go on and pursue a doctorate. I couldn't just settle for getting a bachelor's degree. Perhaps the greatest illustration of how important Rachel was to me is one evening when she asked when I wanted to go to a church youth group meeting that she was going to attend. The group was meeting for pizza in Bellevue, and she enjoyed the friends she had met. As we were driving, we talked about everything. I cannot recall now how the conversation, but even 32 years later, I remember her saying, maybe you are pregnant. At 16 years old, that was one thought that I had never considered. The conversation turned very serious then as I confided in her how I came to be in this potential situation. Rachel made a plan. She told me we would go to emergency pregnancy services the next week to find out if I was in fact pregnant. If I was, she would then come with me to talk to my parents. Talking to my parents about anything was a little unnerving, so knowing that Rachel would be there was an immense relief. The night I had to tell my parents that our lives were forever going to be changed, Rachel was true to her word and walked through every step and tear with me. We told my mom first. I was crying, Rachel was crying. I slid a brochure with information that said baby in front of my mom, and she cried. Next, I had to tell my dad. Rachel continued to stay right there at my side as he learned he was going to be a grandpa at 40 years old. I don't know how I would have gotten through that whole situation without Rachel by my side. Even though I was a teenager and pregnant, Rachel continued to always include me in whatever I was doing. She never wanted me to feel alone or ashamed. She was my rock. I asked her to be my Lamaze coach, and she did not have to think twice about it. I can only imagine what the Lamaze instructor thought as these two young girls came to class every week. On Friday, October 13th, 1989, at about 6 in the morning, Rachel and I were talking on the phone about school and the usual. She was talking about what final she had that day when I began to feel something strange. I told her my water broke. We immediately hung up, and she headed to my house. I told my dad, he called my mom, and Rachel and I were off to the hospital. We were jamming to Simon and Garfunkel as she drove. She was grinding the gears, and I think we ran a few lights because we were so nervous. We did not know exactly what we were in store for, but I knew I'd be okay because Rachel was by my side. Rachel's presence in the hospital room made all the difference for me. Just knowing she was there made the 3-hour labor process more manageable than I could have ever imagined. It was only fitting that I named my daughter, Casey Lee, after someone as special to me as Rachel Lee. Rachel would sing the song, Castle on a Cloud, from Les Mis to Casey when Casey was an infant. As Casey got older and Rachel got further into her college education, Casey would be the test subject for Rachel. Although time and life circumstances did not allow for Rachel and Casey to continue to get to know each other as closely as I would have liked, Rachel will always hold a special place in Casey's heart. At one point throughout our friendship, Rachel told me that the song Wind Beneath My Wings by Bette Midler made her think of our friendship. At that time, I didn't understand it and appreciate what she was saying, But now when I look back over our friendship, I consider that to be the highest honor Rachel could have shared with me. If I was the wind beneath her wings, she was the parachute that always kept me afloat, safe, and able to see situations from another point of view, and always helped me land on my feet, regardless of what came my way.
Have to adjust the mic because you are short. Make Rachel look tall. I'm Joe Evans, and I had the privilege of being Rachel's boss and supervisor for almost 25 years. And she was a good friend and really was close to a family member. My daughter and she were born 6 months apart, and my daughter was a friend of Sean's from her days at Montcalm High School, so they knew each other well. Rachel first came to the Monroe Meyer Institute when she was like 23 years old, and I still remember looking at her and saying, and she was looking for a traineeship, and I still remember looking at her thinking, geez, she looks like she's 16. She maintained looking like she was 16 until she was almost 40, so she was always very young looking. But the thing that really stood out was her beautiful blue eyes, almost hauntingly blue. I'd never seen anybody with that color. It's almost a sky blue, and it really stood out. And anyway, we had a traineeship, and we were able to offer her one. And it lasted about a year, and then when time ran out and we didn't have the additional funding, Dr. Keith Allen and I were both consulting at the Omaha Home for Boys, and we were able to get her a position there. She started their program evaluation system, which is now like years and years later, like 25 years later, is still going with some of the same data that she was collecting way back when. When she first came to work with us, she didn't have no idea or any inkling that she wanted to be involved as a teacher or as a supervisor or as anything other than a clinician. And that really did change dramatically over the years as she became an intern with us, and then a postdoc, and then a faculty member, and then assistant professor, and then associate, and then finally full professor just in the last couple of years. So it was a career path that changed dramatically, and I think a lot of it had to do with some of the devotion and some of the direction that she had for her career. Her career was full of service to children, adolescents, and families. She was one of the earliest pioneers we have. We've developed a model of putting behavioral health personnel into pediatric practices, and Rachel was one of the pioneers in that area. She started actually in Hastings, Nebraska. Dr. Bruce Sheffield is here today, one of her colleagues from way back when, as a pediatrician, and she was able to go to Hastings. Now, Hastings, keep in mind, it's 150 miles away. So every morning, every week, she would get up, like on a Tuesday, 6:30 in the morning. She would drive to Hastings, arrive there around 10, have a cup of coffee, see patients all the way through the late afternoon and sometimes into the evening. At that point, she'd go back, do her notes, meet with parent groups, do a discussion, and then sleep overnight in Hastings. Next morning, get up, start seeing patients bright and early, 8:30 in the morning, leave around 4 in the afternoon, back home at 6:30 p.m. So for 2 solid days. And I kept asking her about, why don't you take the next day off? Because you really should be exhausted. She wouldn't do it. She was just super thrilled, and this was like the avocation she really wanted to employ. So for 3 years she did this, and it allowed her to become a terrific supervisor, a mentor, and a teacher for many interns in psychology, some residents in pediatrics, and residents in family medicine. Her career at UNMC expanded half of her lifetime. So it was she was 49 when she passed. She started with us when she was like 23, so she had more than half of her time spent with us, and we really I think, did become largely her family. She didn't have a lot of Omaha connections here. Her father had been a teacher at both Metropolitan Community College in Creighton and UNO. And so her family largely was from the Minneapolis area. So we, I think our group here, as Brandy pointed out, became her family. Now, this is supposed to be a celebration, so I would like to talk about some of the positive things that we were able to experience with Rachel. I really had the privilege of attending her wedding. She was so happy. I had the privilege of watching her happiness. She had 2 children, and being proud of them for their accomplishments in volleyball and softball and baseball, basketball, and so forth. She was, at the same time, as we were able to have the privilege of the good things, we also had the privilege of being there for her when her brother passed. And when she was having some difficulties in the later stages of her life, and we were able to, I think the folks that Brandy mentioned were almost a team that we worked together. She made a mean cup of chili with Jess's help, and also it's a very good Cuban sandwich. So we were able to share that with her. It was one of our last times we were able to spend time together. I think one of the things that I'd like to do would be to talk a little bit about her capacity as a mentor and as a supervisor, and someone who really influenced not only this direction of integrating behavioral health into practice, but also she developed real close relationships with her students and her supervisees. And I'm going to read it. This was totally unsolicited, but we got a note. Dear Joe and Keith, my mind is reeling and this is so incredibly difficult. Here's what I have to say about my amazing experience with Rachel. My dear friend and colleague, Dr. Rachel Valleley, the news about your death has taken everyone by surprise and is devastating beyond words. Rachel, you were a ray of sunshine and you always lit up a room whether you walked in an office or even over telehealth. Your smile and blue eyes were always comforting to those in any meeting, professional or social event. You have no idea how much you will be missed by those who have the privilege to know you, both by those that got to see you every day, as well as those who kept in touch through a distance. All that you have done on this earth is so appreciated as you have touched an absolute countless number of lives. May God give you peace in heaven. Above and beyond that, I'm skipping through some of the highlights here. Dr. Valleley was one of the first professionals to introduce me to integrated healthcare. She also introduced me to some amazing pediatricians in Hastings, Dr. Ken Duha, Dr. Bruce Sheffield, Dr. Kristen Johnson. As I completed my internship and postdoctoral fellowship under her guidance, I became part of the practice and had the honor to work with these revered physicians every day. Dr. Valleley supported our integrated Hastings clinic since it opened in 1998, and we are so blessed to have had her support. Our clinic in Hastings is now called Integrated Pediatrics PC, and I can say that this clinic would not have existed without the foundation and continued support Dr. Valleley provided for us. Lastly, Rachel loved her children more than anything. We need to pray for her children, Jessica and Jacob. They were the light of her life. Please bring peace to their hearts. This is the most difficult for them. God, please let them gain an understanding and guidance that they will lead lives that are meant to be in the path that she has staked out for them. With that, I'd like to just close that this is written by Dr. Jody Liskey, who is in our audience today, and is been one of our real supporters and pioneers in the whole area of bringing behavioral health to the population of rural Nebraska. And thank you again, Jody, for letting me say some of the thoughts that you clearly had that were moving and quite perceptive. Thank you.
My name is Keith Allen. I'm currently the Director of Psychology at the Monroe Meyer Institute, where Rachel worked, and I actually took over for Joe as the director about 6 years ago. But I've been friends in college with Rachel for 20 years. And I want to share some things about Rachel that have really impacted me profoundly, especially from these last 6 years. Rachel was a consummate caregiver who went into psychology because she cared about mental health well-being of children and families. But more important, because she cared about the well-being of people in general. Since her passing, I've received dozens of emails that really highlight what a passionate and gifted caregiver and provider Rachel was for children, families, colleagues, and coworkers. And students. And here's one that I picked out that kind of summarizes a lot of the comments that I've received. Rachel was a gifted counselor and lifesaver for my daughter when she was really struggling a few years ago. And Rachel agreed to treat her right away so we didn't have to wait weeks to see someone else. I'm forever grateful for her counseling skills and her kindness. Rachel would do that. She would drop everything to meet someone else's mental health needs right now. Here's a personal example. This past summer, after Rachel's health had already started to decline, my wife Paula broke her ankle, and the first person through the front door with food and compassion and support and advice about rehab was Rachel. Rachel was that kind of person as a professional and as a friend. As you've already heard people mention, Rachel was deeply committed not just to training, but to advising and mentoring the next generation of providers, especially young professional women. You can see Rachel's mentoring influence on our graduates from our internship, and it's an impressive list of people. Our Facebook and email accounts have been blowing up with former interns of Rachel writing to us about her impact in their lives, and you just heard some of those from Jody. But most recently, Rachel really humbled me in her willingness to step completely out of her comfort zone and take on writing a $2 million training grant because we asked her to. Now, she loved training interns, but she'd never written any training grant, let alone a $2 million grant. I'd call that chutzpah. But Rachel was really not extremely self-confident. What she was extremely committed to students and to training and to teamwork. We got that grant. She got that grant. That combination of courage and commitment to teamwork, well, that was Rachel. Finally, 6 years ago, when I was asked to take over the leadership of the department, I needed someone to step up and really help me better understand our clinical enterprise and better understand the needs of the department from the perspective of providers. Rachel did that. And I have to tell you, she was impossibly valuable to me, especially in those first few years. I often joke that she was my consigliere, and she really liked that, and so did I. And I will miss her a lot. You've heard now that Rachel reached the rank of full professor this summer in July. I just want to emphasize how much that reflects the fact that her peers and colleagues, not just at the Monroe Meyer Institute, not just at the University of Nebraska Med Center, but across the entire country, validated her rank and moved her to the top of her profession. But more than that, more than any professional accomplishments, she built a career that was characterized by things that matter, like courage, compassion, teamwork, and caregiving. Jessica and Jake, you should be proud of your mother.
So today was, Rach actually gave Brandy and I a lot of guidance on what today would look like. She'd prefer to have perhaps the Go-Go's playing, to maybe have a dance party down the aisles. And I know a lot of us are still reeling. And asking lots of questions of how did we get here? But she would want you to remember the good times, remember the laughter. Sean, you did such an amazing job of telling the story of the young years, and Brandy and Keith and Joe of her professional and adult life. There's a little gap. We don't want to talk about that gap here. There's a lot of us in the room that we had so many fun times with her in college years and our young adult years, before kids and after kids. But I just want to thank everyone for coming today, sharing the love on behalf of the family, everyone who helped out along the way. Brandy mentioned a few folks, and it's just been amazing to see everyone and to celebrate her life. We're going to continue the celebration. We'll go to resurrection for the inurnment, and then after that we'll meet at St. Wenceslas Church for a luncheon. If you're not familiar with St. Wenceslas, there's a new beautiful portion of the church. Don't go there. Go to the older portion, and you can go in the old front doors of the church, what is the new Kane Social Hall, and we'll join there for a luncheon. So thank you everyone for celebrating Rachel's life today.
As we come to the close of this service, I just ask if you would join me in saying the Lord's Prayer together. Now, I typically say trespasses instead of debts, and so I think God will figure all that out regardless what we say there. And immediately following the prayer, I just ask you to stay seated for a moment, if you would, for some further instructions. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen.